This is Walter Bosley, and I would like to share with you my examination of one of my favorite films. The First Men in the Moon. This 1964 Charles Schneer and Ray Harryhausen classic features the H.G. Wells story of the same title and presents ideas that have become popular speculations in the alternative research offshoot of ufology regarding relics on the moon and other celestial bodies. The story in the film begins in the mid-1960s with a depiction of a first moon landing made by an international team. A writer named Bedford is an old man in a nursing home who claims to have gone to the moon and warns the press and the authorities who will listen to him about the insectoid beings who live inside the moon. Naturally, it's too late to heed his warnings that these insectoid beings intend to invade. The story then follows Bedford's narrative 1899 flashback, in which he tells the story of how he, his girlfriend Kate, and Professor Caver journeyed to the moon aboard a spherical craft powered and propelled by caverite, a substance created by the professor, which gives an object, the craft in this case, anti-gravity properties. Upon arrival to the moon, Caver, who has developed a cold, and Bedford leave a flag and a note. But while exploring, they find a shaft leading into the sublunar world. Here they meet the insectoid beings living within. Making their way back to the surface, Bedford and Caver discover that their craft, with Kate inside, has been dragged into the sublunar world by the insectoid selenites, as Caver calls them. After an encounter with a giant lunar caterpillar, Caver attempts to reason with the leader of the insectoid selenites, but Bedford realizes the aliens' true intentions. Ultimately, Caver elects to stay behind in an effort to further reason with the lunar beings, while Bedford and Kate use the sphere to escape the interior world of the moon and return to Earth. Back in 1964, the older Bedford and the newsmen interviewing him watch the live report from the moon landing as the team discovers the Union Jack and the note left by Bedford and Professor Caver in 1899, thus proving Bedford's claim. The lunar exploration team also finds the entrance to the sublunar world, but the Selenite city appears abandoned. It appears that Professor Caver's cold has killed the insectoid selenites, saving the Earth from invasion, an ending obviously lifted from War of the Worlds. This picture is a lot of fun and one of my favorites in my collection. What I have found interesting in recent years are the points of resonance the film carries with popular lunar anomaly, relic, and alternative research hypothesis. There is also a curious likeness to the lore of the airship mysteries of the 19th century. Let's start with the obvious, being what the title gives us: First Men in the Moon, not on the moon. Right there, we're talking hollow moon theory, which we are often reminded of when considering NASA data of the 1960s, which reports that when hit by an object, the moon vibrates or rings like a hollow object or bell. I have talked about this data in previous live streams available here at this channel. But the movie is adapted from an H.G. Wells story first published in 1901, which in itself offers some very interesting details that didn't make it into this film. In the story, Nikola Tesla is mentioned specifically relative to his radio technology, with which a different character receives transmissions from Professor Caver left behind on the moon. This story predates by 2 years the current legend of an alleged 1903 flight to Mars aboard a Tesla-designed airship. The year H.G. Wells' story was published as a novel was also the year Tesla claimed to have actually received signals from Mars. Another intensely interesting bit from the original Wells story is the experience Bedford has during his solo return spaceflight after escaping the moon. Bedford goes through a strange detachment from his identity, seeing himself as a being existing outside time and space, experiencing human life as this being Bedford. Neither the Tesla parts nor this heady episode revealing Bedford's inner soul consciousness are in the Harryhausen film. However, two other film versions were made, a silent film in 1919 and another version in 2010 for British television, starring Rory Kinnear of the current Bond films and Penny Dreadful. I haven't seen either of these versions yet, as they are considered impossible to find. It's very interesting that in the original Wells story, we have Tesla, and we have this weird experience that Bedford goes through. Continuing with the pertinent points in the 1964 film, considering the hollow moon element of the story, at the time Wells wrote First Men in the Moon, hollow earth theory had been around outside of ancient mythology and fantasy for a couple of centuries in the serious astronomy and natural science exploration realms. More recently, historically, with John Cleve Sims, the American, who believed that an entrance to the interior of the planet would be found at the North Pole. Sims' hypothesis was championed into the early decades of the 19th century, and Wells certainly knew of it by 1900. What makes it truly something of note is that the NASA data seemingly validates the idea of hollow celestial bodies within 60 years of Wells's lunar adventure tale. Linked to the hollow moon theme of this film and H.G. Wells' story is the presence of the Selenite city inside the moon, which suggests ancient ruins may be up there. This resonates with analyses in our times of astronomical photography of curious objects on the lunar surface, the so-called lunar anomalies, objects which some people propose are indeed ancient ruins or even active bases or cities. The idea of people living on the moon is an old one, and once again we are presented with modern data that appears to validate more historically recent ideas, which predate NASA's data and the Harryhausen film by a decade. This would seem to counter any argument that the lunar anomaly advocacy began as a result of seeing this particular 1964 movie. Now let's consider Professor Cavor himself, a somewhat eccentric genius who has invented a substance which renders weightless any object onto which it is applied. That the story takes place in 1899 is likely H.G. Wells's inspiration from the 1893 airship mystery, and in Cavor, more specifically, we possibly have the enigmatic Wilson, who is alleged to have developed anti-gravity technology in the 1890s. But even more resonant is the legend of the Sonora Aero Club of the 1850s and Peter Menace, the genius whom Delschow tells us created a chemical substance which also causes an anti-gravity effect, just like cavorite. Did Wells know about the Sonora Aero Club? Might H.G. Wells have learned of such things from gravity manipulator suspect John W. Keely, or any of his associates? Howard Hinton was a writer much inspired by the work of H.G. Wells, and Hinton was a promoter of Keely as well as an associate of Keely patron Clara Bloomfield Moore. We might legitimately ask the question, was H.G. Wells's Professor Cavor of First Men in the Moon influenced by the airship Wilsons and Peter Menace? We did not learn about Charles Delschow until 1971, 7 years after the Harryhausen film. But his curious volumes are indeed dated back between 1899 and 1923. My intention with this analysis was initially to determine if the 1964 Harryhausen film had actually led to hollow moon and lunar anomaly hypotheses, or even a popular retelling of the airship mystery based on wrong assumptions, or perhaps even a fabrication of the Tesla airship to Mars legend. Clearly, the ideas of hollow celestial bodies had been around for centuries before H.G. Wells was even born. The idea of ruins or civilizations on other planets or the moon had also been taken seriously long before Wells. In both cases, hollow moon and anomalous structure-like objects on the lunar surface, the ideas have been surprisingly rendered worthy of discussion as a result of actual scientific data and photographs accomplished well after these ideas were first initiated. The only thing we might question as a possible product of having seen this Harryhausen movie is the Tesla airship to Mars tale. The book on that proposal was published in 2002, but was initiated via a trusted source who claimed to have heard about it from another, unfortunately unidentified source. There are intriguing reasons to entertain the idea that someone flew a Tesla airship to Mars in 1903, but there is no material evidence, only the speculative, motivated by slim documentary evidence. Ultimately, we are looking at a favorable 2 out of 3 score here, where the question of whether the 1964 movie motivated these popular topics in the alternative research community or not. Favorable meaning that the ideas and the data allegedly supporting them pre-existed the movie and essentially also the Wells story. Whether you're into the hollow moon theory or lunar anomalies or the airship mystery legends or not, the 1964 Harryhausen film The First Men in the Moon is an enjoyable classic of its day, produced during the heady days of the real-life race to land on the moon. It is arguably the best produced version of the Wells classic 1901 story in general, though the 1919 and 2010 versions each have their worthy touches, from what little I could find. Seek out this Harryhausen film, First Men in the Moon, if you haven't seen it. It's definitely worth a look.